Hi guys, this is Lalana. Thanks for tuning into the Sovereign Path. So today we're going to talk about when you try to move on and date someone else on the Twin Flame Path. So this is one of those topics that I actually think is pretty funny. And there will probably be a lot of Divine Feminines out there who will agree with this as I start to explain what this is. A lot of you will probably have experienced this. So on this path, there's a lot of times, especially in the beginning stages, sometimes in the midway stages where the Divine Feminine, not gender specific, just wants to move on, just wants to like get out from under this thing. This is generally a lot of times before we really understand that we have been activated to go through a spiritual awakening by the twin. But a lot of times, even when we know that that's what's happening, you know, the ego just gets so damn frustrated and we just want a break, basically. You know, we just want some sort of escape. And a lot of times we just want to get out from under it. You know, we just want to, you know, meet somebody else, move on, date somebody else, just like get the twin out of the system. All of those sort of things that we would typically do if we were experiencing some sort of breakup in our past relationships, or if we were experiencing just a situation with someone else just straight up not working out and we're trying to get over someone. A lot of times this is kind of the default system, is that we're just like, you know, I can get over this, I can move on, blah, blah, blah. So the comical thing about this is that generally, if you are experiencing this path and you try to move on and date other people, you will basically get sabotaged. And what I mean by this, and I have more examples of this than I can probably count from working with lots of people for a long time and also for myself, is that none of the like interactions that we generally have or try to have with someone else that we're potentially wanting to date or wanting to just talk to or hang out with or whatever, none of these situations really feels right? There's just not that sort of resonance. There's not that kind of alignment. When we are trying to date someone else, when you have been activated to go through the twin flame awakening. And a lot of times we'll just sort of ignore these you know, feelings or these misalignments, and we'll just be like, oh, well, it just is what it is, and I'll just go on a date with them anyway, or I'll just meet them for coffee, or, you know, we can, you know, chat on the phone, or, you know, whatever it is, have a video call, whatever, if you meet them online. And even that, like these simple things will somehow get sabotaged. So for example, you could have set up to, you know, have a phone call with someone and they thought you said 3 and you actually said 4, or the other way around. And so you miss each other altogether on the phone call. Or you were going to meet somebody for coffee and you thought it was at this location of the Starbucks and they thought it was at that location of the Starbucks. It's like lots of very like kind of minor but very obvious interferences that start happening that are orchestrated by you as the higher self, that is basically saying no. There are also situations where potentially you'll meet someone who has a very similar energy as the twin or reminds you of the twin in some way, similar interests. You know, if you're like, for example, you know, my twin is a musician and I just kept meeting musicians and I was just like, well, why do I want to date somebody who's basically just like my twin? That's absolutely stupid. Like, what would be the point of that? And so those things can happen as well. Like, things will come up that are just like, it's just like basically showing you, the universe, your higher self, showing you that this is already what you have. This is already what you're dealing with. Do you really want to have the exact same thing? And so sometimes you'll see like doppelganger kind of situations in regard to trying to date other people. Sometimes it'll just feel like just super out of resonance. Like nobody feels, you know, like you're not on the same page with them. You don't speak the same language with them. It's just not clicking. Things are just not working. And for some people, this can happen over and over and over again. And a lot of times it'll be like, well, you know, we have all of these things in common, but it just doesn't feel right, right? It just doesn't feel right. And a lot of this, most of this, it's being orchestrated by the soul, but it's because your vibration is rising once you have been set onto the awakening path. Your vibration is rising. And so when you're still having interactions and trying to have connections with those same type of situations that you have had when you were running that more of that fear-based energy, third dimensional patterning in romantic relationship, it's not going to be that same vibration. So even if you're still in the fear-based energy, and obviously if you're still trying to like escape this thing and run in different directions, you know, and trying to just like avoid it or duck and weave it or whatever, if you have been awakened by the twin, then that means that you are ascending. Even if you are resisting it, you are still ascending, right? No matter how slow it is, right? No matter if it's like an absolute, you know, turtle crawl, you are still on this path and you can't get on it, get off it. So that means that yes, no matter how slowly your vibration might be rising, it is rising. And so you're not going to have those same sort of resonances and alignments as you had before you were awakened onto this path. So it's kind of a twofold situation in that the soul is guiding these, you know, other people that you're potentially wanting to date as just being like absolutely not working. So however that plays out, a lot of times, like I say, it's just really comical because it's just can be very, very obvious that the higher self just stepped in between you and this person. They just sabotage these plans. You know, it's very like in your face, obviously, like this is not the way. And so we're gonna block this, right? And so that only has to happen generally a couple times before somebody finally realizes, okay, apparently that's not the road to take. And it's not because the higher self or the soul is saying, no, you can only date the twin, even though that's how it's translated. It's because the higher self and the soul is saying it's time for you to go through your ascension process and not distract yourself with other things. You've been set on the awakening process, and this is what we are here to do. So it's more of you need to stop distracting yourself and trying to go through all of these escape hatches to avoid what's coming up for you, right? To avoid the awakening, to avoid the Kundalini rising, to avoid the triggers. And having these other escape hatches of sort of dating other people and trying to move on is one of the ways that we try to avoid it, and that the soul comes in and will absolutely block that and sabotage it in lots of ways. So there's that happening, but at the same time, there's also the awareness within self that vibratorily or in alignment or in resonance, it just doesn't feel the same to date people as it used to before you met the twin. And so this can play out, like I say, in lots of different ways. And it's not like saying, you know, I can only date the twin, although that's what we feel, you know, I can only date them and I can only be with them and I can only do them. This is this is the way that the mind is translating it and the ego is translating it. But what's actually going on is you're waking up. You're waking up. And so since you're waking up, these distractions, they're just not going to work anymore the way that they used to work. And people can find this in lots of ways that we try to distract ourselves on this path. You know, it can be past hobbies that we used to have, things that we used to enjoy to do, you know, whatever those might be that suddenly just don't have any resonance anymore, and we don't really understand why, right? And it's just because as your vibration is rising and as you are shifting, you are going to start to feel alignment with other things, right? This is part of this process. This is why when we're going through the dark night, we're going through the ego death, and you know, our life starts to readjust itself, it starts to shift. things start to fall apart, you know, like jobs start to feel out of alignment, friendships feel out of alignment. Things just don't have that same resonance as they had before we were activated on the awakening. This is why a lot of times you'll find where, you know, people are moving, people are selling their house, people are going cross country, you know, people are getting different jobs, people are creating a whole different job altogether than they ever thought that they would have. And all of these sort of things. It's because during these processes, you know, the soul is actually orchestrating these shifts in your life that are in alignment with your highest timeline in this physical reality that you are shifting into in regard to that higher vibratory state and that fifth dimensional frequency, right? So this is an inner union game. This is all about inner union. It's all about you and you. And so you will find that the higher self, the soul, is going to come in and just be like, nope, we're not going that route. We're not going down that road. Nope, that's not the way to go. And a lot of times you will find that these signs will be very, very loud and very in your face and very much, you know, it's like a roadblock suddenly comes up and you're just like, you can't not see that that's not the way that you were supposed to go, right? And this happens often when we're talking about potentially wanting to date other people and wanting to move on and sort of duck and weave this situation. So in those situations, and just to say, I'm not speaking about once you've come into inner union, for those of you who potentially choose to be with a high vibrational soulmate, that's later on. That's not when we're in these initial stages and midway stages when we're still trying to sort of like get out from under this thing and hope that we can, you know, be distracted in other ways, and, you know, and maybe the whole awakening thing will go away. So when we find ourselves in the place of, which is not common, I'll just precursor that, this is not common if you're a true twin flame. So when you find yourself, if you find yourself able to easily move on, to easily date other people, I don't think I said that beginning sentence right, so you can erase that. If you find it easy for you to move on and date other people, if you find that that same, you know, that same paradigm as far as, you know, dating other people and all those sort of things, if that still feels very resonant for you, if it feels very aligned for you, if you don't feel like you're sort of hitting these walls and dating other people, you know, just doesn't feel in alignment at all, if you're not noticing that you're kind of being sabotaged every time you do this, and a lot of times, like I say, this is in kind of comical ways where you just can't not miss it, and you're just like, okay, higher self, I hear you, okay. So if it's easy for you to move on and date other people, then it's likely that you're not experiencing a twin flame dynamic. And as I said before, it's not because you're supposed to be dating your twin is the reason that it's difficult for you to date other people. It's because you're supposed to be just focusing on you, right? This whole path is about bringing it all back home to you, first and foremost. This is why true physical, harmonious, lasting, loving union with the twin cannot anchor until the feminine is in inner union with self, anchored in inner union with self. No wobble, right? Once you're anchored, my neck. Once you're anchored in inner union, there's not going to be any wobble going on, right? You're going to see things come up for you, but they're not going to affect you anymore. Inner union is a very stable energy that you are now embodying. And as you're moving toward inner union, you are no longer, I should say, as you're anchored in union, as you're anchoring in inner union, you are no longer going to have to be sort of aware of like what you're thinking or how you're acting or what you're doing in regard to the twin and all of these sort of things, in regard to like trying to stay in balance all the time, you know, like trying to stay in balance, and I'm trying to like do all of these things. These are daily practices once we can move into inner union. Once you are in inner union, then your default system is simply balance, right? It is simply unconditional love. It is simply in that higher vibrational neutral state. It is simply freedom. And it's no longer trying to get there. It's no longer trying to, like, you know, think your way there or will your way there or any of those things. It just becomes who you are now, because now you're vibrating at a higher frequency, as I said before. So I just wanted to hit on that because I see that a lot come up in the comments, you know, wanting to sort of move on and, you know, just kind of get out from under this thing and date other people and all of those sort of things. And obviously, it's not to say that there can't be other situations that come into your life that are going to assist you on this path. But those will be vibratory matches, right? Those will be in alignment. You will know the difference on whether or not your soul is guiding you to have certain interactions with certain people that can help to push you along the path, as opposed to being in a panic energy of trying to get out from under this thing and use other people as distractions, right? So I just want to make that clear. There are, in some cases, all twin flame dynamics are unique. There are, in some cases, other soul family members who will come in to the divine feminine's life at certain points if the divine feminine needs that assistance through this path. But that's a very different resonance than, and you'll know that because these people just kind of show up out of nowhere. It's not because you were looking for it or seeking it or trying to like duck and weave the awakening process or get out from under your twin. This is going to be a situation where suddenly this person just showed up. They're in a high vibrational energy. They're supportive. They're loving. Doesn't have to be romantic. This can also be platonic. And as I've said in a lot of my videos, we need to keep in mind that this entire path is already orchestrated, right? The mind has no say, the ego has no say, even though they think that they do. Your entire family, soul family, is assisting you on this path while you're going through the awakening process, right? And so there are parts of this awakening path for some of us when we find that we're just continuing to like run into that dead end and run into that dead end and loop and loop and loop and go in circles, and we just can't let that ego break through. In those situations, you will find that there are sometimes soul family members that will show up in your life to assist you to that next rung on the ladder, right? So have that awareness. Sometimes that can be teachers. Sometimes that can be guides. Sometimes that can be soul family members. Sometimes that can be, you know, just somebody out of nowhere that you just happen to run into at work that you never really knew very well. And it can be like just a day or just 2 days that help you to sort of shift. Sometimes it can be somebody that you just pass when you're walking your dog in your neighborhood, and it's a 5-minute interaction, and that's all you needed to have that shift forward, right? So it doesn't mean that these are always relationships, but you'll know when these happen. You'll be able to feel them. It's very, very different from what I'm talking about and regarding trying to move on and trying to date and all of those things. Almost always, the higher self is going to come in, the soul is going to come in and sabotage that situation, because that's not the path that you're on. And your soul is going to make sure that you're walking the path that you're on. So I hope you guys have an awesome day, and I will see you soon.